Hi there, everyone. My name is Andersen, and I'm a teaching artist with the Meta Arts Alliance, which is a nonprofit arts organization located in Twisp, Washington. I'm here today to work with you on a writing lesson, and it's very strange that I'm in the studio and you're in your home, but I think we can make this work together. I think we can have a really enjoyable time working on writing, something that I love to do. So before we start, what I'd like for you to do is to make sure that you have a pencil and paper with you. We aren't going to need it right away, but I want you to at least have it close by, because there are going to be times in the video where we will stop and you will have a chance to do some writing on your own. Okay, I hope you have your pencil and paper ready. We're going to start, the kind of writing that we're going to do today is called memoir writing or memory writing. It's obviously about some memories that you have of when you were younger. And we're going to use a book, a teaching text, I call it, to help show you what I mean by memory writing. We're going to use a book that has a pattern. You're going to be able to borrow ideas from this book in your own writing. The book we're going to use is a book called When I Was Young in the Mountains. It's by an author named Cynthia Rylant. This is a very well-known book. It's won lots of awards. It probably is in your school library right now. And Cynthia Rylant, in this book, talks about memories that she has of growing up in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, the Appalachian Mountains are like our North Cascades Mountains, but they are on the other side of the United States. So they're a long way from us. But I think that because you live near the mountains too, you will probably recognize some of the things that she talks about in her book. So we're going to read this book together. And I have a little assignment for you while you are listening to the story, while I'm reading it to you. And that assignment is to think about the ways that Cynthia Rylant, the author, uses the 5 senses to help you really understand what she's explaining. We all have 5 senses, and so when Cynthia Rylant talks about them, you can also relate to them and you can understand what she means. Now let's just review what the 5 senses are. We start out with the eyes, the sense of sight, of seeing, and then there is your nose, which is the sense of smell, your mouth, which is the sense, and the inside of your mouth, which is the sense of taste, your ears, the sense of hearing, and your hands would be the sense of touch or feeling. So those 5 senses are very important in writing. And you will see when we read, you'll see that Cynthia Rylant uses those over and over in her writing to help make these images really vivid to the person that's reading her book. So as you're listening, please listen for those 5 senses and the way that she uses them. I want to show you, as you're thinking about all of those 5 senses, I created a graphic that has all of the 5 senses around the outside. In the middle, I put When I Was Young in the Mountains, because that was the name of the book that we read. And then I have taste, sights, feel, smell, and sounds. When I Was Young in the Mountains by Cynthia Rylant, illustrated by Diane Good. And you'll notice that it's dedicated to her grandparents, because it is about her grandparents. When I was young in the mountains, grandfather came home in the evening covered with the black dust of a coal mine. Only his lips were clean, and he used those to kiss the top of my head. When I was young in the mountains, grandmother spread the table with hot cornbread, pinto beans, and fried okra. Later in the middle of the night, she walked through the grass with me to the Johnny house and held my hand in the dark. I promised never to eat more than 1 serving of okra again. When I was young in the mountains, we walked across the cow pasture and through the woods carrying our towels. The swimming hole was dark and muddy, and we sometimes saw snakes, but we jumped in anyway. On our way home, we stopped at Mr. Crawford's for a mound of white butter. Mr. Crawford and Mrs. Crawford looked alike, and they always smelled of sweet milk. When I was young in the mountains, we pumped pails of water from the well at the bottom of the hill, and we heated the water to fill round tin tubs for our baths. Afterward, we stood in front of the old black stove, shivering and giggling, while grandmother heated cocoa on top. When I was young in the mountains, we went to church in the schoolhouse on Sundays, and sometimes we walked with the congregation through the cow pasture to the dark swimming hole for baptisms. My cousin Peter was laid back into the water, and his white shirt stuck to him, and my grandmother cried. When I was young in the mountains, we listened to frogs sing at dusk and awoke to cowbells outside of our windows. Sometimes a black snake came in the yard, and my grandmother would threaten it with a hoe. If it did not leave, she used the hoe to kill it. 4 of us once draped a very long snake, dead of course, across our necks for a photograph. When I was young in the mountains, we sat on the porch swing in the evenings, and grandfather sharpened my pencils with his pocket knife. Grandmother sometimes shelled beans and sometimes braided my hair. The dogs lay around us, and the stars sparkled in the sky. A bob white whistled in the forest. Bob, bob, bob white. When I was young in the mountains, I never wanted to go to the ocean, and I never wanted to go to the desert. I never wanted to go anywhere else in the world, for I was in the mountains, and that was always enough. All right, I hope you were listening carefully and you heard lots and lots of sensory images. I'm going to share the ones that I heard, and hopefully some of these will be the ones that you remember as well. Taste. What did she tell us about taste? Well, she talked about the heated cocoa that her grandmother served for her. She talked about cornbread and beans and okra, and I know what those taste like, so I could imagine what the taste was like. She talked about hearing frogs singing at dusk, cowbells in the morning, and a bob white whistling in the forest. And she even gave us the way the bob white sounds. Bob, bob, bob white. As far as smell is concerned, we heard about sweet milk, the sweet milk smell, and we could imagine what the hot cornbread, pinto beans, and fried okra smelled like when they came to the table. As far as feel is concerned, I can imagine what a kiss on the top of my head might feel like, shivering and giggling when I came in from the cold, sitting in front of the fire, and a white shirt that stuck to my back. All of those were good feeling images. And finally, what did she help us see? A big mound of white butter, black dust on my grandfather's face, a dark and muddy swimming hole with snakes in it, stars that sparkled in the sky, and finally, a dead snake draped around our shoulders. So I hope that those were the things that you also heard and remembered as examples of the ways that you can use your senses in your writing. All right, now it's time for you to do your writing. And the first thing you might want to think about is what topic you're going to write about. Now, what I'd suggest is that you think about several topics and maybe even plan for several topics and then pick the one you really want to write about. So I've listed some things that you could write about and that other students that I've worked with have written about, but really, you get to choose. So if there's something that's not on this list that you want to write about, go for it. All right, let's look at the list though. You could write about a vacation that you've been on, a special vacation that you remember. You can write about a holiday celebration with your family. Maybe a time you got hurt that you remember really well. A special sports event. You can write about something funny or something very sad. You could write about visiting a relative or a place that you used to live. And you could even write about something that really frightened you. So if you want to write about one of these things, that's great. But think about all of the things in your memory that you can remember really well, because the important thing about your topic is that it's something that you can remember so well that you can add lots of details about. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few minutes. You can pause the video to think about the topics that you would like to write about. Okay, so you've chosen your topic, or several maybe, and so we're going to go through an exercise that will help you plan for your writing ahead of time. You can see that I've created a graphic, and in the middle I've put when I was young, and I left a blank because that's where you're going to write your topic. When I was young, where or when? And then around that circle in the middle I've put sight, taste, feel, smell, and sounds. And this is a planning sheet. So this is what you do before you start your writing. I'm going to think about a topic that I might write about and just show you how I would begin using this planning sheet. And then you can create something like this for your topic. All right, ready? The topic that I'm going to write about is when I was young in North Carolina. So I lived in the state of North Carolina when I was a little girl, and I have lots of really wonderful memories about living there. So I'm going to put on this line, when I was young in North Carolina. And again, you're going to write your own topic right in there. Now I'm going to think about the memories that I have of when I was young in North Carolina. And I think that the very first thing I remember was that I lived in a house that was surrounded with pine trees, and I remember feeling pine needles underneath the trees. And I remember that when I was wearing my shoes, they felt like a soft cushion when I would walk on them. But when I was barefoot, they felt prickly and itchy. So when I write about when I was young in North Carolina, I might have a paragraph about the pine needles. I remember smelling the smell of something called succotash, which was corn and peppers that my mother would cook. These came from our garden. And then I remember smelling them on the stove when she was cooking them. And then I also remember the succotash that I would eat after she was finished. She would put them in jars and put them on the shelf, and we would eat them all winter long. I remember the sounds. I had a path behind my house that I would walk to my friend's house on. And as I walked along that path, I remember hearing the sounds of birds in the trees and small animals that would rustle. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them rustle in the bushes. All right, so if I start my writing, I'm going to start with those things that I remember that come to my mind first, and that's what I would do if I were you as well. So I'm going to give you some time right now to stop the video, to put one of your topics in the middle of the page like I have, put the 5 senses around the outside, and then think about what you remember about that topic that relates to each one of those senses. Okay, I hope you were able to think of lots of great details about the topic that you're going to write about, because that will make it so much easier. And the next step we're going to do is to move from your graphic to the actual writing that you're going to do. And so to do that, you're going to need to have your graphic right next to you, and you're going to need a fresh piece of paper that will look a little bit different. And here is what that piece should look like. All right, so now we're going to start the final piece of writing. And you can see that on a plain piece of paper, I have written the sentence 3 times that we started with. When I was young in North Carolina. When I was young in North Carolina, and when I was young in North Carolina. And then I took those notes about the pine needles and I wrote them into a paragraph underneath that first line. So here's what my paragraph sounds like when I think about those pine needles outside of my house. When I was young in North Carolina, we lived in a pine tree forest. I would walk around on a cushion of pine needles in my yard. When I was barefoot in the summer, the needles felt prickly and itchy. So you can see how I went from my notes to a paragraph with sentences. But I used that the sentence that I started with at the beginning of every one of my paragraphs. Now maybe the second paragraph might be about the path where I could hear the birds and the little animals rustling in the bushes. And maybe my third paragraph would be about the succotash that I remember smelling and then tasting. And then that would be my final piece of writing. So now it is your job to take your topic and your planning sheet, to write the sentence 3 times on your page, and then to use your notes to write wonderful sentences about each one of those, each section on your page. Each one of the things that you remember. And be sure to fill it with lots of details. You can have as many sentences as you want to write about each one. And when you have finished, you will have something that sounds very much like Cynthia Rylant's book, When I Was Young in the Mountains. All right, good luck. Hi there again. I just wanted to come in right here at the end. And I hope that you have enjoyed your writing and that you've been able to come up with a very successful piece of writing about images that you remember from when you were younger. I also hope that you can find a way to share this writing, especially with your classmates and your teacher, and that sometime very soon I will be able to come into your school and into your classroom, meet with you in person, and share the writing that you've done. Thank you so much.